Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Steve Yastrow. I'm here with my friend Craig Klein from Sales Nexus.
Hi, everybody. This is Craig. Appreciate you all joining us today. I'm really excited about today's presentation. Steve Yastrow is the author of Ditch the Pitch, as well as Brand Harmony and other books, and he's a sales strategist. And I'm really excited about listening to him share his thoughts about how you can increase margins and stop competing on price by focusing on your customers. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Steve, and let you take it away.
So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for coming, and thank you, Craig, for working with us on this and for that introduction. As Craig mentioned, we want to talk about how to improve your sales, how to improve margins, how to have customers buy from you for reasons other than price. So we've partnered with our friends at Sales Nexus because this is what they're all about, helping us sell better. You know, my company switched from Salesforce.com to using Sales Nexus last year as our application for managing our sales, and we're very happy, and it's been a wonderful partnership to talk with them because we share these ideas about how great conversations with customers are what advances your sales. And that's what gets customers to buy from you for reasons other than price. And that's what we're going to focus on for the next hour. Now, most of the people who've signed up for this webinar today manage salespeople, have some sort of sales management role. If you don't manage salespeople, that's fine, because I'm going to speak to you both from the perspective of you being a sales manager, but also being somebody who sells. And I also know that a lot of you sales managers do sell also. So let's get started and talk about how to increase your margins with sales habits that last. Do any of these sound familiar to you? Does this ever go through your mind? Our salespeople say that our customers only care about price, or our customers go to bid every time they want to make a new purchase. Our conversion rate, it's much lower than it should be. We don't seem to win enough sales. Our customers don't give us enough time for meetings. We have so much we need to tell them about our products. Or our salespeople just aren't able to tell a compelling story about why we're different and why we should matter to our customers. Do you ever have any of these concerns? They ever wake you up at 2 in the night thinking about them? You may have other concerns. And these are what we want to address, because this is not the situation we want, where our customers just aren't that interested in us. Here's what we want instead. We want engaged customers who reveal important information to your salespeople and pay close attention to what your people say to them and want to buy from you for reasons other than price. This is what we want. We don't want the comments I put in that first slide where people just aren't interested in you. This is what we want. Let's talk about how to get there. I want you to imagine 2 scenarios. So scenario number 1, imagine that you are a customer. Now, there's a guy who wants to sell you something. You've been on his prospect list for a long time. He's wanted a meeting with you, and guess what? He finally got the meeting with you tomorrow. He's coming to see you at 10 a.m. in your office tomorrow to sell you something. He's so excited he finally has this meeting with you that today he's got his laptop out and he's preparing the perfect PowerPoint presentation to show you tomorrow. He's so excited about this sales meeting with you tomorrow that he's going to practice in front of the mirror tonight for about an hour. And in fact, he's going to make his wife listen to the presentation. And tomorrow when he wakes up, driving to your office, he's going to practice in the car the whole way. And in fact, he's going to practice his sales pitch so much that when he gets to see you tomorrow at 10 a.m., he's going to deliver it perfectly. He's going to give you a perfect performance of his well-rehearsed pitch. Now imagine this. When he does that, how are you going to feel while he's giving you that pitch? What are the odds that this perfectly rehearsed sales conversation with you is exactly what you want to hear? My guess is it isn't. If he's planned ahead of time what he wants to sell to you, how in the world can he know what is the right message for you at that moment? You're probably not going to be that happy with this sales guy. You're probably not going to buy from him. You're probably not going to feel like he had a message that was right for you. Now let's consider another scenario. You or one of your salespeople is meeting with a customer. You're selling this time. And this customer had a very distracting day. The day was crazy. 100 unread emails, meetings all day long, and now they have this meeting with you, and they're very distracted going into it. But you start speaking with them, and you and this customer start having a really engaging conversation about their business. And they become very engrossed in the conversation, very engaged. And pretty soon, all of those other distractions, all those unread emails, all those hassles on the jobs and distractions of everyday life have gone away because this customer is completely enveloped and engaged in this conversation with you. Think of the difference. The salesperson who prepares a well-rehearsed script and delivers that pitch to you flawlessly versus the salesperson who engages with the customer in a meaningful conversation. This is what we want to do. The reality is that sales pitches just don't work. I mean, is anybody out there like to be on the receiving end of a sales pitch? Probably not. What we need to do is ditch the pitch. We need to get rid of our sales pitches and instead think of another way to engage customers. And that's what our focus is today. Now let's think what it means to ditch the pitch. Because a pitch, the word pitch, it's a very one-way word, isn't it? When a baseball pitcher throws a pitch, he's hoping it doesn't come back. You pitch something out of a boat, doesn't bounce back, does it? You pour water out of a pitcher, it's only going one way. And that's what a sales pitch is about. It's about delivering a message, explaining why your product is so great for the customer. But that doesn't resonate with a customer. We want to ditch the pitch and instead think of a different way to approach our conversations and sales with customers. Now, as we start talking about this, Craig mentioned I wrote this book, Ditch the Pitch, and you're probably asking, well, why are you listening to Steve Yastrow? So let me take just one moment and talk about why I'm here to give you this message. My career, I had a long stint as a vice president of resort marketing for Hyatt Hotels. I come from the hospitality industry, excuse me. So I have lots of experience helping people make decisions in those kind of businesses. And I wrote 3 books over the last 20 years. I've had this business. I wrote my first book, Brand Harmony. My book, We, The Ideal Customer Relationship. My latest book, Ditch the Pitch, which we're focused on today. And my company, Yastrow Company, has had the opportunity to help many, many companies. This is just a short list of who we've helped. And the main point is through the years of developing this experience, I've seen what works and what doesn't work. I've seen what encourages customers to make decisions to buy from one company versus another. And that's what I want to share with you today is an aspect of that. How people make decisions when they interact with a salesperson in a way that makes that customer more likely to want to buy. Now, to get started with telling you how this will work, I want to share a key principle with you. One of the problems with marketing and sales as they are normally practiced is that they assume that the message can be delivered to many people. I mean, think about a company doing something as inefficient as putting an ad in the Super Bowl. They have decided to say the same message to 96 million people. Now, do you think those 96 million people all have a similar perspective and similar outlook on life and all make decisions the same way? I mean, of course not. It's one of the compromises you make with any sort of mass communications that you're watering down your message to make it somewhat palatable to everybody, and it doesn't really resonate perfectly with anybody. But the same thing happens with sales. We prepare a pitch or an elevator speech, and we deliver it to every customer, but every customer is different. We need to recognize that of the 7 billion human beings on this planet, every single one of us is unique. Everybody's unique. None of us are the same. You might have heard that we share 99.5% of our DNA with each other, and it's true, but we are still completely unique. We're not the same. And so you need to recognize that with every customer. Everybody you talk to has a different reason for buying from you. They have a different reason for making decisions about what's best for them. They have different needs and different benefits they're looking for. What this means is that when we create a message for customers, we cannot deliver the same message to every customer. We need to personalize our story for each customer. Think about what this means. When you have a sales conversation, you don't have one message for every customer. You need to meet a customer and say, okay, how do I personalize and craft my message in a way that will resonate with this person at this moment? Personalizing your story for each customer is our first key principle. And as we think about that, what this means is that we need to turn every single presentation into a conversation. I want you to think about banishing the word presentation from your vocabulary. It's time to talk to a customer. Don't present your product information. Have a conversation about it. You have a proposal for a client. Don't present the proposal. Have a conversation about the proposal with your client. We want to turn every single presentation into a conversation. Now, I'm going to add something to this slide. In addition to turning every presentation into a conversation, I want you to turn every presentation into a conversation that matters. This is a key ditch the pitch principle that we want to think about. When you present, you're not resonating with your customer. You want to create a conversation with them. And when that conversation really matters to your customer, then they are completely engaged with you. They're not thinking of anything else. The distractions of life go away. Now, if you think about what I mean by this concept of the conversation that matters, look at your personal life. Think of the richest times you have interacting with your friends, your loved ones, your work colleagues. Aren't some of the richest experiences you have when you're engaged in conversations that are really meaningful to you? Conversations that matter. Conversations that are two-way, where you each learn from each other, where you're reaching a goal together, where you're collaborating with each other, where you feel like you've really had a connection and a bond. This is what you want with your clients. This is what you want when you're talking to customers. Whether it's a prospect or an existing customer, ensure that you are turning every presentation into a conversation that matters. The kind of conversations we want go this way. We want a conversation where your customer is so completely engaged in the conversation with you that they're not thinking about anything else going on in their life. They're eagerly sharing their needs and interests with you, and they're eager to hear what you have to say. This doesn't happen when you prepare a pitch and you go in to give it to a customer. Think about my story I gave you at the beginning of our time together today. The guy who practices his pitch perfectly to deliver it to you. It's not going to resonate with you. Instead, you want to create a conversation that's completely engaging and engrossing, so your customer is really eager to talk to you. Now, let's think about what this means. If you're going to ditch the pitch and get rid of your script and go into a conversation, not exactly knowing what's going to happen because you're ready to create the right conversation for this customer at this moment, what it means is that you need to improvise. You need to be ready to get rid of your script and improvise. Now, I am personally fascinated by the concept of improvisation. I love improvisation. It's a big part of my life. I like to do it a lot. I play music. I also live in Chicago, which is the world capital of stage improvisation. Many of you have probably been to improv theaters around the world. Maybe you've been to Chicago and been to Second City or other theaters here in Chicago. And so to write the book, Ditch the Pitch, as part of my research, I talked to many actors who practice this art of stage improvisation. You know, many actors came out of Chicago, many of the folks you see on Saturday Night Live and other places came out of here. And we have this wonderful resource of people who have studied this whole idea of improvisation. And what I'm going to share with you today are some of the things I learned from them that we can translate to our sales conversations. One of the people I interviewed in my research on improvisation for this book, Ditch the Pitch, is a guy named Mick Napier who owns a theater in Chicago. Get this name, it's called the Annoyance Theater. And I asked Mick, so Mick, what is improvisation? And he said this. He said, improvisation is the art of not knowing what you're going to do or say next, but being completely okay with that. Ponder that for a minute. Think about what that means. The art of not knowing what you were going to do or say next, but being completely okay with that. Having the confidence that you will know what to do or say next. Understanding that what your customer says and does, the environment around you will give you the ingredients and the information to craft the perfect next step in this conversation as you improvise it. You don't need a script. You are totally capable of improvising like a virtuoso. So much of being human is about improvising. Think of your day. You're constantly improvising. When somebody calls you on the phone, You improvise when you hear what they have to say. You go out with your friends for dinner. You improvise. You're cooking and you're missing an ingredient. You improvise. We are natural improvisers. We just need to take our human talent, our natural human talent for improvisation, and bring it into our sales conversations. So let's talk about how that works. How do you improvise to create the right conversation with a customer so that that customer is so engaged in the conversation, they're not thinking of anything but this conversation, and they want to share information with you and hear information from you? So I'm going to give you an overview of our Ditch the Pitch system here. Now, we obviously don't have a lot of time today. We have enough time for me to acquaint you with the system, and at the end of the webinar, I'll give you some thoughts on how you can follow up on this to implement it in your company and in your own sales practice. So our goal is to try to get more yeses at higher prices, obviously, right? We want a higher conversion rate with the right customers buying from us. We want them to buy from us for reasons other than price, to see so much value. Now, to do that, we have three aspects of our Ditch the Pitch system I'm going to review with you today. The first step in getting more yeses at higher prices is to figure out what's going on. And I'll dig into this in a few minutes, what I mean by that. First thing you have to do is find out what's going on with this customer. Then you have to go with the flow and create a really flowing conversation. And then as you're creating that flowing conversation, you want to create a shared story. I call it letting a shared story emerge, where your customer doesn't just see you as some separate narrative out here, but you're woven into their own personal narrative, and they can't imagine addressing their most important issues without you. So let's talk about these three aspects of the Ditch the Pitch system: figuring out what's going on, going with the flow, and letting a shared story emerge. Let's go to the first ingredient here, figuring out what's going on. One thing I want you to believe is that no matter how well you know your customer, when you sit down with them, you don't know what's going on. Even if it's a customer you speak with all the time and you talked to them yesterday, you don't know what's happening today. And especially if it's a new prospect, even if you've done your research and you've looked at their website, you've read their LinkedIn profile, which of course you should do, recognize that you still do not have all your information. When you go into your conversation, you need to figure out what's going on. Now, this is important for many, many reasons, but one thing I want you to think about is this. You're selling against competition all the time, aren't you? We all have competition. Customer information is your best competitive advantage. Think about what I mean by that. Customer information is your best competitive advantage. Your competitors are trying to tell your customer about their product features and their specs and their service agreements, and it's all important. But at the same time, if what you're focused on, in addition to those things, is understanding your customer and using the information you gather about your customer to craft the perfect engaging conversation for this customer at this moment, then you have an advantage over the competition. Now, as I explain how you do this, one of the things I want to introduce is the concept of what I call Ditch the Pitch habits. It seems a little bit ironic to talk about habits when we're talking about improvisation, but if you think about your life and what enables you to improvise really well throughout your day is that you have this baseline of habits upon which you can improvise. Think of it this way. Let's say you're driving somewhere and somebody comes out of an alley or a side street and cuts you off. If you have really good driving habits, you know that you don't slam your foot on the brake and you don't yank the wheel and you look in your mirror really quickly. If you employ good driving habits, you will more successfully be able to navigate your way around that obstacle and improvise your way to safety. By the same token, if you have good conversational sales habits, like listening to your customer before you talk, a habit like focusing the conversation on the customer and not on you. If you have good habits, when you sell and converse with customers, you'll be able to improvise a better conversation. So I'm going to introduce to you today 6 habits. 2 habits fall under each of the 3 areas I talked about: figuring out what's going on, going with the flow, and letting a shared story emerge. And let's talk about what the first 2 habits are. The first habit that helps us figure out what's going on is a habit I call think input before output. Now ponder that for a minute. Think about what it means. Input before output. What it means to think input before output is to listen, observe before you talk. Information comes into your brain before you decide what comes out of your mouth. Because what comes out of your mouth is informed by what you've learned from the customer. Input before output. Now, in my book, Ditch the Pitch, and on my website, yastrow.com, and if we're able to have a conversation later, or if you take our online sales course, we'll talk about at the end of the webinar, you'll learn more about these habits. But I'm going to share with you one tip today. And this tip for figuring out what's going on is called say less to notice more. And it's something I want you to practice. If you want to get in the habit of being in input before output mode, practice saying less. I mean, what problem do you think most salespeople have? Talking too little or talking too much? We know what it is. Most salespeople talk too much. Think about what happens if you're able to talk less. If you say less, you're going to learn more about your customer. Say less to notice more. Because when you're talking, you can't be noticing things about your customer. And also, research shows that in two-person conversations, the person who speaks more than half the time enjoys the conversation more. So if you can dial down how much you talk and ensure your customer is talking more than half the time, guess what's going to happen? Not only will you learn more, they're going to enjoy speaking with you more. Input before output. Develop this as a habit. When you sit down with a customer, your natural inclination should not be to start talking about your latest product release or whatever it is you want to say, but be in input mode. Now, another habit that goes along with this idea of figuring out what's going on, I call size up the scene. What does it mean to size up the scene? Well, when you think input before output, you're bringing information into your mind. And with habit number 2, size up the scene, this is where you interpret that information. This is where you say, what's really going on here? What am I learning? What does this mean? You know, I think of sizing up the scene in this way. You ever gone to the movies, and even though you had great plans to get there on time, maybe you left your house late, traffic was bad, couldn't find a place to park, and you get there late, and the movie started like 9 minutes ago, and it's really frustrating, I know, to walk into a movie late, but let's think about it when it happens. What do you do if you sit down in a movie theater 9 minutes after the movie started? You're trying to figure out what's happening, aren't you? You're trying to size up the scene. Where are they? Why are they talking that way? What's going on? And you eventually catch up, don't you? Well, this idea of walking into a movie late is exactly what happens in every single customer conversation you ever had. Because you are never walking into a customer meeting with a customer, a blank slate, just waiting for you to show up. Every time you talk to a customer, you're entering their life in the middle of their day, the middle of their career, the middle of their life. And you got to figure out what's going on and size up to see what's happening with them. So one of the tips I want you to think about for sizing up the scene is, I call it who before what. When you think about what it takes to engage a customer in a way that makes them want to buy from you, it makes them want to really be so engaged that they would buy from you even at a higher price and throw out the competition. So much what drives that customer's decision is based on who they are as a person. We sometimes have a tendency to look at the statistics and the demographics. Oh, it's this kind of company and this job role and these are issues now. And those things are really important, but it's actually more important and a bigger influence on their decision making is who they are. What kind of decision maker are they? What kind of personality do they have? What style of buying do they have? So one of the things I want you to think about, yes, you need to understand all the facts and figures and statistics and issues going on in their life and their business. But if you focus first and foremost on who they are as a person and size that up, you'll be much more successful at engaging them in conversations that are really, really meaningful to them. So this is our first area of our pitch system, figuring out what's going on. What we're talking about is developing habits. Habits, think input before output, size up the scene. And imagine yourself having those habits so well ingrained that when you sit down with a customer, you're really, really good at figuring out what's going on. This will now help you improvise a great conversation. Let's move on to our second area, which I call go with the flow. Now, we talked earlier about the importance of conversation and how conversations that matter are so engaging. I mean, think about what makes us different from all the other animal species on the planet as humans. And there are many things, but one of them is our ability to use language to collaborate with each other, to share ideas, to move things forward. And so this section of the Ditch the Pitch system is all about really creating those flowing, engaging conversations that make your customer not want to be anywhere but with you. Because engaging conversations build collaboration and agreement. You know, when somebody's getting a pitch, they're like, okay, prove it to me. And then at the end of the conversation, you hope your customer goes thumbs up and not thumbs down. What we want to do instead of that is create these flowing, engaging conversations that build collaboration and agreement throughout. So you and your customer are moving together through the process. And by the time they're ready to buy, it's almost a foregone conclusion because they've been working through the process with you together. So let's talk about what it means to go with the flow. And I'll introduce our second two Ditch the Pitch habits. The first one is called create a series of yeses. Ditch the Pitch habit number 3. Creating a series of yeses. Now, if you think about great conversations in your life, they are a series of affirmations and agreements where you and the other person continually agree to move forward with the conversation. You continually agree to respond to what the other person said and not change the subject. You continually agree to keep listening to that person, not interrupt them until it's your turn to talk. You agree to move towards a conversational destination together. This is what you want to have happen. Now, habit number 3, create a series of yeses, is based on a core principle that was invented here in Chicago as the stage improvisation scene was developing in the 1950s. And the concept is called yes and. And what I want you to think about that is what it means to say yes and in a conversation with a customer. Now, the way the stage improvisation folks use this concept is really simple. If two people go out on a stage to improvise a scene, and remember, they have no script, they have not talked about it, one of them offers something, and the other person picks up on it. Like, let's say you and I were doing an improvisation scene, and all of a sudden you said, wow, look at the hailstones, they're the size of golf balls. If I look up in the sky and say, what do you mean, it's sunny out, our scene dies. But if I say, yeah, one hit me on the head, all of a sudden I've taken your offer and agreed with it and built upon it, and now we can move forward. Let's apply that to a conversation with a customer. If you can find a way to agree with and affirm what your customer says and build upon it, the conversation continually moves forward. Yes, and. You want to always look for something to say yes to. Now, obviously, there are things you cannot say yes to. If a customer says, hey, can you lower the price by 50%? The answer is no. If the customer says, can you get this done in 3 weeks when the project's going to take 8? The answer is no. But we want to be really careful with using the word no, because the word no can break conversational momentum. We're not going to lower the price. We're not going to get the job done in 3 weeks instead of 8. But what I believe is there's always something you can say yes to. You can ask the customer a question about why do you need it sooner? And maybe what they'll say is, well, we need this one piece of the project done, and maybe you can make that happen. Or maybe you can say, we can get the project done sooner, and here's what it will cost to do that. The point is, you want to keep conversational momentum going, and the word no is like a red light. Let's keep the green light of yes by finding things we can say yes to. There are many things that you might want to say no to. Not only a question your customer asks, but what if you're going to meet with a customer and they're bringing their boss, the decision maker, to the meeting, and the boss doesn't show up? Yeah, it's going to be hard to close the sale, but you have to say yes to the current situation and say, okay, I got to work with what's happening here, and maybe my goal is not to close the sale in this meeting, but to earn the right to get the next meeting with the boss, because crying isn't going to work. You have to say yes to the situation you're in and find a way to move forward. Our next habit, habit 4, explore and heighten, is a very important part of our Ditch the Pitch system. I've mentioned this term conversational momentum a few times. And what I mean by that is that if you want to have the customer completely engaged in conversation with you, so they've shut out all the distractions of their life and the only thing they're focusing on is you selling to them. You have to create this real flow of conversational momentum, and one of the best ways to do that, to keep the customer really feeling that they're in the flow of conversation, is to find things your customer really, really cares about and focus the conversation on those things. So I look at it this way: exploring, as you're thinking input before output, sizing up the scene, creating a series of yeses, you're exploring to find what your customer really cares about. And when you find that hot button, one of those issues that is so important to your customer, you dig into it. You heighten the conversation by talking about it. I mean, think about your life. If one of your friends asks you about something you really care about, maybe a hobby you're really interested in, your kids, a vacation you just went on, if one of your friends shows genuine interest in something you care about and you have a conversation with your friend about the thing you care about, you feel pretty good, don't you? Isn't it wonderful when somebody cares about something that you care about and wants to talk with you about it? Of course, it's wonderful. Now, imagine that with your customer. You discover something your customer really cares about and you focus the conversation on that. That's when your customer gets really engaged with you and shares great information. Identify your customer's higher level issues and focus on those issues. When you find a hot button for your customer, dig in. Don't say, oh, that's great, I'll notate that. Ask them about it. Create a conversation that's focused on what your customer really cares about. When this happens, when you identify a customer's issues and then heighten the conversation by digging into this, let's think about what happens. Yes, the customer becomes more engaged in the conversation, but also they start to reveal the higher level reasons they might need your product. Think about what that means. If your product does this, there's always a bigger reason that somebody needs it. You know, we've always talked about the old adage that people don't buy drill bits because they want to have drill bits, it's because they need holes. They don't just make holes because they want holes, because they need to hang something on the wall. There's always a higher level reason for buying a product. And you want to discover those things, those higher level issues that will help your customer choose you over the competition and value your product or service. And you do that by engaging them in deep conversations about the things that are most important to them. Explore to find what's important to your customer and heighten the conversation by digging into those things that are so important. Think of a few things that happen when you do that. Do you think you're going to seem different to the competition when you identify your customers' hot buttons and explore and heighten the conversation and talk about those things? Your competitors are talking about their products and their features and their specs, and sure, you got to weave that in somewhere, but instead you're talking about what your customer cares about most. You will be so different than the competition in your customers' minds if you implement this idea of exploring and heightening really, really well. So let's think about where we've come so far. We've talked about how you first need to figure out what's going on, because no matter how well you know your customer, there's information you need to gather to improvise the right conversation for this customer at this moment. And the way you figure out what's going on is with our first two habits: think input before output and size up the scene. Then we move down to our second area of the ditch the pitch system, go with the flow, which is about creating these engaging conversations that create collaboration and agreement with your customers and get them so interested in speaking with you, they wouldn't think of anything else but you at this moment. And you do that through our two habits that are on the screen now, creating a series of yeses and exploring and heightening. Now, let's take this and move to the next level, how we can move towards the customer saying yes. Move to our third area of the ditch the pitch system, which is called let a shared story emerge. Now, I use this term, a shared story. Let's think about what it means. You know, every human being has a very active narrative in their own mind. I mean, don't you? Don't we all have a story going on in our brains all day long about our life, our needs, our interests, what we're doing? We all have a strong narrative in our mind. So here's your customer with this strong narrative in their own mind, and here's your story sitting out here. Do you want to make the customer leave their personal narrative and learn about your story? Or how about bring your story, your product, your offerings, the benefits you can have in the customer, the impact you can have in their life and their business, weaving that, your story, into their story. Imagine that when your customer thinks about the issue issues that your product or service addresses, they can't help but think about those issues without thinking about you interwoven with how you help them address those issues. Where the customer doesn't think of you as something separate, but thinks of a shared story where your offerings and their needs and interests are woven together. You do this by directly connecting your offerings to your customer specific needs. Remember what we've said, every person on the planet, 7 billion of us, we are all unique. We all make decisions differently in our own ways. So when you can understand your customer specific needs, interests, and ways of approaching things and directly connect your offerings to those personal parameters for your customer, that's when they'll see you as being different. Now we have 2 more ditch the pitch habits that go with our third area, let a shared story emerge. Ditch the pitch habit number 5 is called focus the conversation on your customer. Focus the conversation on your customer. Now to understand what this means, let's ask a really obvious question. Who do your customers care about more, you or themselves? Now of course, the customer cares about themselves more than they care about you. I don't care how much your customer loves you, they care about themselves more. Okay, that's fine. If they care about themselves more than they care about you, what should we focus the conversation on? You or the customer? Doesn't it make more sense to focus it on them? When you're having a conversation with a customer, make sure the subject matter of the conversation is really about them, not about you. And here's a tip to make that happen. Make 95% of your customer conversation about the customer. I don't mean that they talk 95% of the time. Yes, as I said earlier, I want your customer to talk more than half the time, but even when you're talking, make sure that 95% of the subject matter of the conversation is about the customer. Now this may seem counterintuitive because you're thinking, wait a minute, if 95% of the subject matter is about the customer, how in the world am I going to tell them all the amazing things my products, my services do when I only have 5% of the time to talk about me? Well, here's how it works. You don't need to tell your customer everything about your product. You need to help them see how what you do meets their specific needs. So let's say you're having a conversation with a customer and they tell you something that's really important to them. Like let's say they need something done in a certain deadline because their company has a certain time frame within which they need to make something happen, okay? And let's say you've got a part of your offering enables you to get things done quicker than the competition. Now you can pull out that one feature of your product and directly weave it into the conversation at that moment. Or maybe a customer mentions a certain product feature that they've always stumbled with. That's the time you can talk about that product feature because you attach that particular need or that particular feature to your customer's need at that moment. The idea is through exploring and heightening, you identify the customer's hot buttons, and at the right moment, you take part of your product offering and bring it into the conversation. You weave it into the conversation, and that's how you create a shared story, by attaching your specific offerings one at a time to the specific needs and interests of your customer. I mean, think about what happens. Let's say you discover a customer's hot button issue, and at that moment you take part of your product offering and you weave it in the conversation. And your customer says, wow, now I see how that could help me. Imagine if that same product feature you have was on, I don't know, slide 19 of your PowerPoint deck, bullet point 7. Same piece of information. Is your customer going to notice it? Is your customer going to remember it? Is your customer going to understand how that product feature of yours can help them? Probably not. But if you pull it out at the exact right time, when you're talking about a specific need you've discovered your customer has, and you weave it into the conversation, that's when the customer goes, that's for me, and they understand what makes you different. Your goal is not to tell your customer everything about your product, your service, your company. It's to help them see how the specific things you do directly attach to their specific personal needs and interests. Now, our 6th ditch the pitch habit is called don't rush the story. Now, we all want to close sales quickly. I want you to close sales quickly, but the irony is that sometimes when we try to close a sale too quickly, we actually slow it down. I mean, think about this. How often do you sit down with a customer, and because you know your stuff and you're an expert in your business, you start talking to somebody, and within 90 seconds, you have a list of ideas this long of how you can help them? It happens all the time, I'm sure, because you know your business. You hear a customer situation, you have lots of prescriptions for them right away. But it's not only is it likely that you're going to come up with that list so quickly, it's also just as likely the customer will not be ready to hear your ideas as fast as you can come up with them. Because your customer doesn't think about your product, your service, your offerings all day long like you do. So if we rush the story, if we start loading too much information on our customer too soon, giving them every idea we have as fast as we have it, we actually, in an effort to move the sale forward, slow it down. We can overwhelm our customer. Your goal is to discern how much information your customer is ready for at any point in time. Part of improvising the perfect conversation for each customer at each moment is to understand, okay, when is that customer ready for a little more information? How do you not rush the story? I think of it this way. I've seen salespeople kind of get excited when they discover something a customer needs. They want to tell the customer all the ideas they have. It reminds me of somebody taking a bunch of rocks in a slingshot and just shooting them at somebody right away. And if somebody shoots a slingshot at you, what do? You probably duck. And you do not want your customer ducking. Don't load the slingshot and throw too much information at your customer. Bring information in at a pace your customer can accept. Now, one of the tips I want to leave you for this habit number 6, don't rush the story, is this. I call it leave things in your pocket. I mentioned a few minutes ago that your goal is not to tell your customer everything about your business. And you have to be careful not to overwhelm them with too much information at one time. You have so many things to tell your customer. Do not tell them everything. I can't tell you how many times in sales training people have said to me, but we have so many things to tell our customers. We don't have enough time to tell them to them. I said, well, then don't tell them everything. Because if you try to tell your customer everything, they're going to remember very little of it. You know, you have many scarce resources in your business. Of course, your scarce resources are time, money, people. Those are scarce resources. But in addition to time, money, and people, you know what your 4th scarce resource is? Your customer's attention. Your customers only give you so much attention, and you have to look at customer attention as a rationed good. You need to spend it wisely. So don't tell your customer things about your business that aren't that important to them. They may be important to you. They may be important to every other customer, but if they're not important to this customer, leave it in your pocket and only pull out of your pocket the aspects of your product, your service, your offerings, your company that are important to this customer at this moment. Pace the conversation, bring information at the right time, and weave the information about your product gently into your customer's narrative, and then you'll create that shared story where they can't imagine moving ahead without working with you. So we've reviewed 3 areas of the Ditch the Pitch system and 6 habits. Let's just take a quick review of them now, and we'll talk about what you can do to move forward. The first area, figuring out what's going on, I left you with 2 habits. Think input before output and size up the scene. Our second area, go with the flow. The habits are create a series of yeses and explore and heighten. And then we talked about how to let a shared story emerge. And the habits I shared with you there were focus the conversation on your customer and don't rush the story. What I know is this, having worked with many, many salespeople and sales managers with their salespeople, I've seen this. No matter how good a salesperson is, or no matter what kind of a novice they are, when they practice these habits and make them true habits, where they don't need to think about doing them, they automatically go into a conversation and think input before output. They go into a conversation, they automatically focus the conversation on their customer. Because they've created really good habits, their sales increase. And the reason their sales increase is because using these habits helps customers be more engaged in conversations with these salespeople, and those customers are more willing to share information and hear what the salesperson has to say. These habits create those collaborative, engaging conversations that move relationships forward and lead to more yeses. So my encouragement for you at this point is to think about what you're going to do to move forward. Moving forward after today. As we know, Most of you, not everybody on this call is a sales manager. And again, if you're not, no problem. But for those of you who are sales managers, think about this. What are you going to ensure that your team members will practice ditching the pitch every day and in every customer conversation? Practice creates habits. Think about what you can do as a sales leader to encourage your people to interact with customers in this way, to ditch the pitch, to stop presenting and start conversing, to turn presentations into conversations that matter to customers so the customers are engaged and want to buy from your salespeople for reasons other than price. That's going to happen if your salespeople practice ditching the pitch. What are you going to do as a leader to ensure that they do? Then personally for you, what are you going to ensure that you practice ditching the pitch? Both when you're selling, because many of you sales managers also are selling, but also in your leadership conversations. Think about how you can ditch the pitch talking with one of your people to find out what's really going on with them. Ditch the pitch requires practice. Think about what you can do to ensure that your team members practice it and that you practice these ideas. Now, let's think about what you can do beyond that to make that happen. And as I mentioned before, we've partnered on this webinar with our good friends at Sales Nexus. And as I mentioned, I really love Sales Nexus. It's a wonderful application for managing your sales and your marketing automation. And the folks at Sales Nexus have really, I think we had a real meeting of the minds that we understand that moving sales forward is a function of building relationships through conversations over time. And one of the things Sales Nexus helps you do is not only track who your customers are and what you're talking about with them, but when you're going to have conversations with them. So I encourage you to look at Sales Nexus as a way to help you support these efforts to improve your sales and get higher margins, more yeses at higher prices. So let's talk about some of the things you can do to help your team get more yeses. Craig Klein and our good friends at Sales Nexus are going to offer all of you a free Sales Nexus trial. And basically you get a chance to use all the full features of Sales Nexus and get some help with lead generation, etc. So this is something I want to really encourage you to do. And if you go to salesnexus.com, you can learn more about this trial. And you can also send Craig an email at the email address written on the screen. In addition to giving you a free trial of Sales Nexus, Craig and his team are willing to do a consultation with you to document your sales process and identify areas for greatest impact and help you with a report after that. And I really encourage all of you to get in touch with Craig and take advantage of that. Additionally, I know you've invested time in coming to this webinar. I am willing to spend time on the phone with anybody. If you want to get in touch with me, my email address is on the bottom half of the page here too, and you can see it there. And we're happy to talk about how you can take these ideas and move them forward in your company. Now, in addition to that, I mentioned how ditching the pitch requires practice. We also have an online sales learning program which takes the ditch the pitch system and helps you or your salespeople really ingrain it into your sales process, really practice it in every customer conversation over a 7-week period. The way this works is that each week we'll give you a few short videos and some tools to learn. Maybe 10 or 15 minutes online is all you need to spend. And that learning will then guide your customer conversation throughout the entire week. So this is a structured way to learn to ditch the pitch a little bit at a time over a 7-week period, with most of the time you spend on it in actual customer conversations. Now, we're giving a special price for this online sales learning program to people who are attending this webinar of $99. And so you'll be able to get that sales learning program for only $99. I encourage you to ask us about that too, and I encourage you to do it for you or your salespeople. And what you'll find is through the 7-week period of practicing ditching the pitch, you'll become that much more adept at naturally using these habits to create engaging, meaningful conversations that lead you to better sales at higher prices. And also, as I mentioned before, my email address is written on the screen, and I showed you Craig's a moment ago, cklein@salesnexus.com. Please feel free to get in touch with us for any questions, conversations, comments you might have, and ideas for how you can move your sales forward at higher margins and create sales habits that will really last and improve your business. I want to just offer all of you the best of luck in helping improve your sales. through the means we've talked about here. Excuse me. And thank you all very much for attending today, and I hope to hear from you. So thanks very much. Have a great day.